So Nvidia stock is making record-breaking moves and we absolutely have to touch on it. Now, when I say record-breaking moves, I'm not only just referring to the fact that Nvidia just hit record new all-time highs, which of course is a great record in itself, but I wanted to highlight a new record, right? And that's the record, or that's the fact that now Nvidia is the largest holding in the Nasdaq 100, making it the most valuable company in the world. Now, something else that's pretty interesting is that we're seeing pretty much a large amount of or pretty much all the stocks in the Magnificent Seven for today at the time of this recording have a down day where we see Microsoft is red, Apple's red, Amazon's red, Meta's red, Google's red, Tesla's red. Pretty much everything is red except for Nvidia. And I saw this funny post on X of someone saying they're selling everything else to buy Nvidia. And you see everything else down but Nvidia. Now, Nvidia has an interesting stock because this is something where you have a lot of different opinions on it, right? You have a lot of individuals, especially if you go on x.com or any other, social platform, saying that this thing is overpriced, it's a bubble, and they say it's akin to the tulip mania. However, I want to go ahead and highlight why I believe that is not necessarily the case. Now, I made a video about this 3 weeks ago, actually, highlighting how there was this kid on x.com who lost it all trying to short Nvidia stock as it kept going up. And that was 3 weeks ago, right? We're seeing Nvidia stock much higher than it was when the kid was shorting it. And hopefully he's not still trying to short Nvidia because, this thing is still going up. He was saying it was overvalued. And there's a lot of individuals who look at a company like this and they may only look at it from one perspective. They may look at something like a technical indicator like the RSI, highlighting how it's overvalued or overbought. But that's just one data point, right? And oftentimes I highlight how just using one data point is not a great way at evaluating a company. And that's why I say you want to have a multi-dimensional approach. And here's why I want to share how Nvidia isn't necessarily a bubble. Could it be slightly overpriced? Yes, we'll go ahead and touch on that. But why it's not necessarily a bubble. So let's go ahead and touch on this. So one thing a lot of those individuals on X or even on YouTube tend to forget is that companies tend to move aligned with their earnings per share, the actual fundamentals. This is the stuff that a lot of people ignore, but it's important to watch. And we see that net income per share, earnings per share, jumped from 83 cents last year to $6.04, right? The diluted earnings per share is 82 cents to $5.98. Insane. And so a large amount of market participants, they're not just looking at those little squiggly lines in the chart and just looking at the RSI and saying, oh, wow, this was overbought, because someone might have said, hey, it was overbought over here and not even realize that it continued going up. And this is why I kind of, talk trash about technical analysis. I use it still, but I kind of talk trash about it. Now, this was a swing trade idea that I shared within the Push and Profit private group before it broke out. And, I took a position, I think I wrote it up to here, $72 as a swing trade. In the long-term portfolio, I'm still holding it, right? And here's why I really like Nvidia, right? So fundamentally, the company is looking great, especially if we revisit the statement of income, right? Some companies call it the consolidated statement of operations. Same thing, income sheet, right? Income statement. And something that's pretty interesting is the net income growth. We're seeing gross profits increase. We're also, let's take a look at pretty much total operating expenses. It hasn't increased that much. And so that means that they're not having to spend a whole lot to go ahead and keep up with what they're doing in terms of growth. And so this is insane. Look at the net income from last year to this year, right? And so that's something that we want to be mindful. Fundamentally, the company has something of substance that is the reason why the company is pushing up, right? A bubble. I think a lot of people think something that's overbought slightly in a bubble are the same thing, and that's not necessarily the same thing, right? Because a bubble is like the tulip mania or maybe the 2001 bubble, right? Or 2000, where pretty much a lot of companies were going to the moon not really based on the fundamentals, just because capital was flowing in when the companies weren't profitable. But we have a company that is jumping in profits, and the forecasts are expected to continue to grow in profits. And so that's not necessarily a bubble, right? That's not a castle in the sky, some market participants would call it. This is something of actual substance. Now, something else that's pretty interesting is we see that earnings and revenue growth forecasts are still continued to, they're still projected to go upwards. Now, of course, you can't just extrapolate the price now and say, hey, look, this is what we see in the future, and say that the stock is going to exactly follow whatever forecast you make, because at the end of the day, there's so many different variables that could influence what ends up happening, right? There's macroeconomic influences that could shape everything as well, and that's something that I also talk about within the Push and Profit private group. But that this is a positive sign, right? Analysts believe that the earnings and revenue is going to continue to grow as there's not much competition for Nvidia currently. Now, here's something that maybe the bears may like. I'm going to throw a little bit of bear seasoning on this, right? So the bears may eat this up. They're going to love this. So the reason why I say Nvidia may be slightly overbought, but doesn't mean it's in the bubble, is because we're currently at a share price above the 1 year price target for many analysts, right? The 1 year price target is around $125 per share. We see that today we're already $10 over that. So there, unless the analysts update their price targets, which I believe they most likely will, right? We may see Nvidia come down a bit. I believe that towards the end of the week we may see some volatility for some other reasons. We'll probably touch on that later in this video if we have some time to. But from a price target perspective, from what the analysts are saying, we're slightly ahead, but it's not a huge move. It's not like it's more than 15%. We see here, this is from Simply Wall Street saying, look, as long as it's not a spread of 15%, the delta of it being overbought from what analysts predict is not bad. And so that's good news. Now, another reason why I like Nvidia, and this is a funny thing, right? I talked about this. This is one of the reasons I mentioned it as a buy back in December, was because we have Nancy Pelosi, right? One of the greatest traders of all time, because she's in Congress and she has insight from Congress. She still holds her options position in Nvidia. Now, I know someone's going to say, oh, it's not her, it's her husband. Look, if there's someone in Congress who makes rules and laws and they know what Congress is working on, right? Let's say the CHIP Act or anything else, right? And let's say what we do with Taiwan and foreign policy, whatever insight that individuals in the government have, that's definitely great insight. And that's why Nancy Pelosi has an estimated net worth of $249 million when her salary is just $200,000. Look, I know a lot of friends that work in tech that make $100,000, $150,000. I have some friends that make $180,000, right? Not $200,000, in annual salary, but their net worth is not $250 million. Their net worth is not close to that, and that's because one, they're younger, but two, even if they were older, they're not having the insight that Nancy Pelosi has, where her trades are absolutely dominating. I mean, if you know what the government's going to do, and you could buy into, a company that's going to benefit from, a bill that the government's looking to post or vote on, well, then of course that's insider information, right? But of course that's just a different topic. But Nancy Pelosi still hasn't sold her an Nvidia, and I made a joke, months ago in the beginning of this year within the Push and Profit private group that until Nancy Pelosi sells her Nvidia, I'm holding on to mine, right, in my long-term portfolio. Now, something else that I want to highlight from a macro perspective, and this is something that a lot of individuals may not have touched on, but today we got the Mayhem Used Vehicle Index, and I know some people will say, what does this have to do with Nvidia? Well, let me go ahead and tie this down, or kind of tie it together, right? So we're seeing that used car prices are going downwards. And we know that pretty much one of the main contributors to inflation in the last inflationary readings has been insurance premiums for autos. And that's because when we had this supply chain constraint during the pandemic, right? It wasn't because of actual demand. It was artificially, the prices were artificially up because of the supply chains. Well, that caused used autos and even new autos and rentals to go upwards in price, and the insurance premiums were lagging. But then eventually towards the end, and in 2023, we started seeing insurance, premiums go upwards, and then now we're seeing car prices start to fall downwards. And so we're likely to see insurance premiums go down even further. And I know I was talking about this with my girlfriend, right? So we talk a lot about, she's in the industry as well. And we talk about things like this. And she mentioned, well, why are insurance premiums not going down? And I actually showed her how insurance premiums are going down. My Progressive monthly payments are going down, right? And so that's something that's going to help the inflationary gauges and the reports. Now, what does this matter? Well, one thing we know is that there's a large amount of capital that's sitting in money markets. And as we start to see the yields in money markets go down, as we have inflation go down, the trend of inflation, not inflation itself, but the trend of inflation go down, that means that the yields are likely to go down once we have the Federal Reserve start cutting rates. And so that means that we have let me simplify this. We have a large amount of money on the sidelines that's likely to pour into equities fairly soon. And so that means that companies like Nvidia can still have more capital injected into it and push it upwards. Now, would it make it overvalued even more a bit? Yes, right? But of course, right now, fundamentally, we don't have a lot of competition for Nvidia, and Nvidia is absolutely dominating. And so we're seeing just records. We're seeing records, and this is why I've been buying Nvidia in my long-term portfolio. This is why my long-term portfolio is significantly outperforming the market, because let's look at this. Let's look at this. Let's just look at January 5th, where we won't even get the first trading day. January 5th to now, it's up 166%. Let's take a look at SPY, right? The S&P 500. Although the S&P 500 has been having a great year, where I'm not denying that it hasn't, it's up. Let's look at, to be fair, January 5th, because that's where I started, till now, 17%, right? So definitely a nice move within the broader markets, but not in comparison to what Nvidia is doing. And so if you guys want to have access to my trade ideas and my daily briefings, where I talk about what's going on in the overall markets, make sure to check out the second link in the description down below. Also consider subscribing for this channel so you guys don't miss out on any future videos. And let me know in the comment section down below, what are your thoughts on Nvidia stock? With that said, just wanted to provide this update today of how Nvidia stock is now the largest company. I don't know why it's not loading. The largest company in the world. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts. And with that said, I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care, guys.